Good evening. My name is Brianne Ford, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here as part of today's session of alternative venues and jazz. I want to first thank Gail Boyd for having me on. It's been such an honor and a privilege to be a part of this community, this alternative venues and jazz community, this jazz community overall. Um, want to talk today a little bit about my experience as a musician, as a female musician, as a black female musician. But I want to just get started with how I got started because every story has a beginning. So I was born in the birthplace of jazz, New Orleans, Louisiana. And one of the things about growing up in New Orleans is that there's music everywhere. There's music in the streets. There's music you go to church, of course. There are parades, there are second lines, there's all this just amazing music that's around you. And sometimes when you grow up around it, you can almost not take advantage of the fact that it's just a normal thing. Like people everywhere play instruments in the street. Isn't that a normal thing? So my appreciation of music started at a very young age without even knowing. I just knew it was there, and it was always.
Okay. I do need a return call today from Gail Boyd regarding.
I got my first, I guess, taste of jazz in a few ways. I guess you could say it was serendipitous, or maybe a gumbo to be a little cliched, but some people have a direct path into how they discover jazz music. Mine was very, very broken up into small little parts. So my mom was a librarian at a college, and she brought me home one day a real book. I was 8 years old, and I'd already had a piano, and I was taking piano lessons and classical music and studying and having recitals and things like that. And she brought me home a real book, and I had no clue what it was. I looked at this book, and of course, those of you in the audience know about the real book, but there was these notes and these funny alphabets and these symbols and these things on top. And I knew that I could read the notes. That I knew I could read. But everything else, C major 7 with a sharp, I had no clue what those symbols or anything meant. I can remember, however, seeing my favorite things. And I believe at one point in time, I heard John Coltrane on the local radio station, the jazz station, WWOZ, and Coltrane's playing my favorite things. And I go back to my book and I'm like, oh, I have this music. So from that point, I was able to kind of piece and pick apart, of course, and the root, but the chords, I still had no clue. It was also during that time, there are so many musicians who are part of the New Orleans music legacy. I, as a child, lived in a neighborhood called Laura Knight Ward, and had a neighbor who was friends with my mom, and she did my hair. And her last name was St. Cyr. And she would talk about her grandfather, Mr. St. Cyr, who was a musician, and he played with Louis Armstrong. Once again, I'm about 10 years old, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was a big of a deal. So she'd do my hair, she'd do my press and curls, and have me looking all pretty. And then she would take me into their living room, and she would show me these photos of her grandfather with Louis Armstrong, his albums, and just all of these pictures and all this legacy. Well, her grandfather was Johnny St. Cyr of the Hot Fives and the Hot Sevens. And it was just such an honor that I didn't really understand, I knew that it was something. I really didn't understand at the time how really important that her keeping on to that and those memories and being invited in and seeing it. Of course, there were some other ways that I learned about jazz. had an art teacher who would play Thelonious Monk albums. I also attended high school at the New Orleans Center of the Creative Arts. So if you're familiar with NOCA, pretty much anyone who plays jazz out of the city of New Orleans, and actually a few actors and um, dancers, creatives came out of this high school. So I was able to get admission to this high school on piano, and I studied with a gentleman by the name of Clyde Kerr Jr. Um, Clyde, his influence for me still goes on to this day. I had my first gig because of Mr. Kerr. I got my first taste of what it meant to be one of the boys in a room full of boys. But I was always allowed to feel at home. I was always welcome, and it was always about the music. And those moments, those NOCA moments, I particularly the older building NOCA, I I cherish greatly, and I cherish Mr. Kerr greatly. Um, I also studied with a lot of people. I've studied with a lot of teachers over the years, and I've studied with a lot of our jazz elders. But I had the opportunity to study piano with Ellis Marcellus, and there were some things. If you knew Ellis, he's a great man, great family, and he was able to raise such talented young men into young boys into men who are phenomenal musicians. I mean, Wynton Marsalis. But it was a little almost intimidating to study with him because it was like, oh my gosh, I'm studying with Branford and Wynton and Delphio and Jason's father. But I remember my first few lessons with him, and he would say to me, he had a lot of stories, and I love those stories. But one of the things he would say to me about playing is, don't play all this complex stuff. Keep it simple. Stick to voicings and shells. And I want you to work on voice leadings. And of course, I wanted to play all these polychords and all of this stuff and all this Tanner stuff and all this quartal stuff. But he really honed in on the ability to play three notes, and playing it well, and playing it tastefully, and playing to the style of the music. So stripping things down and getting to like the bare bones and the meat and potatoes of a song. And I still keep that today of stripping it down, getting to the bare minimum of a song. What is the melody? What is the harmony? How does the bass move? What are the inner harmonics? What are the voice leadings? All of those things, and you can discover some really beautiful things. Um, a really great, exercise, I would say, is to find one song, particularly maybe one that is from pre 1930s, and following its progression from vaudeville, if it's a vaudeville tune, and following its progression through each era stylistically. If it's a vocal tune, following how the vocalist would phrase the songs at the time, and following that song to the present day, and how um, musicians or vocalists approach that song and approach that music. You find a lot of gems in understanding how music progresses and how a song progresses, and really in a lot of ways how society progresses. Um, I'm a firm believer that music and society and the world, they all go hand in hand. Music reflects the time of the people reflect the time in the music. So I have had the honor of studying with several greats, Mr. Marcellus, of course, Harold Mayborn, of course, James Williams, James Wideman, to name a few. But I, I've I've discovered along the way, yeah, a lot of experiences. Um, One of them being that when I went to jazz school, there weren't too many people who looked like me. When I went to jazz camp, I went away for the first time. I went to Skidmore up in upstate New York, Skidmore Jazz. There weren't too many people who looked like me. There weren't too many women or girls, and there weren't too many people who reflected me. And that has kind of been something that I've experienced in my journey as a musician. And it shaped me. It shaped my experiences. It shaped how I view the world. It shaped how I move as a musician and as a woman. It shaped just a lot of things like healthy boundaries, keeping a good head on one's shoulders, and really always just sticking to the music. If I were going to give advice to a young woman or a young man, but a young woman who were interested in playing jazz, I would say to them, stick to the music. The music is your foundation. That's the core, that's the key. Learn your solos, transcribe your solos, go to the sessions, study, get a mentor, tap the masters, ask them, pester them if you have to. Hey, what are you doing? Hey, how do I do that? Hey, that's killing in jazz speak. We say killing. And get as much information and soak up as much information as possible from our living masters. Um, and of course, over time, I would also say something that is very important and key is eventually finding your own voice. Um, in my music, I bring home with me. I'm from New Orleans, so everywhere I go, it's New Orleans for me. It's a little bit of home, and I try to bring a little bit of that feeling and that energy into my music, in my playing. And I would say the same thing. If you're from Houston, wherever you are, bring Houston with you. Bring it in the music. If you're from Detroit, if you're from LA, if you're from Chicago, if you're from Mississippi, wherever it is that you're from, allow those traditions, allow those stops, those major cities um, along the Great Migration, allow them to color your sound. You know, I remember talking to a musician about there being a Texas saxophone sound, and there being and of course Newark, which is where I live now, Newark being an organ town, and just organists and organ bars, and that shaped the culture and that shaped the music. So I would say that wherever you're from, bring that sound of your home with you because that's your core. That's part of you. Um, I would also say to always remember the swing. Um, you can play a lot of notes, but for me at least, make sure that it's swinging. So I've been working on a few things. 2016, I released my debut CD. It's an all-female jazz CD entitled Invocation. It has a few of my originals. One of them entitled For Clyde. I wrote a piece for my teacher Clyde Kerr. He had just had a particular way of approaching chords, and he used to have these big, huge hands, and I can remember not being able to reach and play them, but stretching just to, oh, I can get it. So when I wrote this song with his memory of him and these big chords and these specific rhythms that he would play. And, when I hear it, I hear his horn playing. But I released that album, that CD, in 2016. 2017, I did a project called The Summer of '67 here in Newark. on the music, the sounds, the images of 1967. Um, that was a labor of love, of passion, and I learned a lot about just the history of how the history of people and the history of the land intermingles with the music and it informs the music. Um, right now, I have a few things, a few projects that are brewing. I have a group. Uh, it's called Black Women in Jazz. It's a Facebook group, and it's open to Black women, women of color, as a safe space and a place for women musicians, Black women musicians, and women of color to talk about, of course, to share their gigs and things that they are, things that their projects that are working on. But it's also a space to kind of talk about some things that might happen um, in our journey as a woman and as a Black woman, experiences that you can't necessarily talk about in certain spaces, but one can talk about amongst yourselves. So that has been it has been an honor to host this group, and it's been an honor to meet women from all over the globe, Black women from all over the globe who are making this music and playing this music, and to learn about their stories and to learn about themselves. Um, Most recently, I wrote an article for a semi um, journal here in Newark called The Newarker, where I followed the steps of Sarah Vaughan here in Newark. So I started at Newark Penn Station. I went to her home on Brunswick Street, or what used to be her home on Brunswick Street. I went to the house that she lived on Avon Avenue, where Mary Baraka wrote a poem called Avon Avenue. Um, Sassy used to live there, to paraphrase. And I went all over the city, just tracing her steps, trying to find, just a little bit of what was her story, her life here. Obviously, Newark is not the same from that time, but there are spaces that are still here. There are monuments that are still here. The ground, the air, the water, the soil, and actually some of the people are still here. So it was a great adventure to partake. Right now, I have a project that I'm working on as a young person. Um, I was very fortunate to have my mom who supported my music and supported me playing piano and gave me the ability when she saw that there was a talent. She nurtured it. So I got my first piano when I was probably 8 or 9. I had piano lessons. I was able to go out to certain jazz camps as a teenager, leaving New Orleans, coming up north, going to Berkeley, 5 Week, Skidmore, different places like that. And I was able to have these opportunities because of her. I was able to have these opportunities uh, because there were people who believed in my playing, believed in me, and wanted to see me successful as a musician. Currently, my role and my job outside of being a jazz musician, I like my my day gig is I work with children here in Newark, New Jersey. I teach music, and one of the things that I see is that, of course, there's a need for more instruments. There's a need for more instrumental program. But even within our instrumental programs, there is a lack of Black girls. They're not picking up the trumpet. They're not picking up the trombone. And as I've spoken to my fellow educator, teaching artist friends around the country, they're seeing the same thing. The girls are just not they're just not into instruments. They're into singing in some cases, but they're just not into instruments. So my vision is that I would like to put an instrument and private lessons, semi-private lessons in the hands of Black girls, starting from late elementary school and on. So I have a scholarship that I've started. It's a GoFundMe for now, but we're going to build and expand upon that to where we pick two young women. We're starting small, um, who have a desire to play. That's all you need. You want to play. You want to play? Got it. We'll give you an instrument if you need one, and we'll point you in the direction of an organization that's local to you, to where you can that child can have a lesson and learn on their instrument. So that is something that I am incredibly passionate about. Um, I know that for me, I wouldn't be the musician that I am right now had I not started at such a young age and had such external forces pushing me to the music. You know, we are living in some very interesting times right now. And I just want to really thank Gail Boyd for having me on this program. Um, it's been refreshing to see my musician peers um, sharing their stories about their lives. It's been refreshing to see people pivot and doing their live streams and discovering other ways to get their music out there. For me, I feel as though the pandemic has really given me clarity of what matters, what's important, what matters. And I keep that to heart of our health matters, our family matters, our mental and our emotional and our spiritual health matters. So, I've coped the best way that I've been able to by just retreating to my piano, um, playing and writing, finding opportunities that were safe and comfortable for me to play, and pivoting and looking at this industry and looking at this music from a different perspective. Um, Not as so much as I'm a performer and I'm touring and I'm getting, I love it, I love it, but more of what other opportunities, what other things are there brewing or bubbling, that are not tapped, in terms of using social media, in terms of content. This group, this live is a perfect example of that of that of just pivoting and finding different ways and alternatives in different places to get your sound out, to get your music out, to discover and find new audiences and new people to hear your sound and hear your music. So that's a little bit about myself. I believe, that our beginnings are always a reflection of our endings. And I would say, for those of you listening out there, um, those musicians, those industry folks, are just folks. Take the time, if you can, every day. If you play, make sure you play every day. If you listen to the music and you're a lover of the music, listen to the music every day. Find something that moves your spirit, that moves your heart, and run with it. And it makes everything go just a little bit better. It's not perfect, but I do believe that music has the ability to heal, it has the ability to soothe, and it has the ability to really bring us to another place, another space. Well, not to quote, I almost quote Sun Ra, but definitely music has the ability to take us to another place. and to bring us from, if we are feeling down or we're feeling low, to really either bring that to light or to heal us from that. So I would say to the audience out there, play your music, listen to your music, dig into your art, dig into your writing, you know, spend time with the people that you love, your families, and just try to be the most creative, um, inspiring person that you can be. Um, I would share with the audience out there. Thank you.